I am Julie Kirk, NACAC's Government Relations Manager, and we are coming to you live today from NACAC headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Thanks so much to those of you who are joining us for this conversation. We will be joined by Alyson Tom, who is a member of our Government Relations Committee, and we will be chatting with Alyson about our upcoming advocacy meeting. The meeting will take place March 3rd and 4th here in Washington, D.C. For those of you who are tuning in, who are not yet registered for the event, there are still just a very few number of seats remaining, so I would definitely encourage you all to register as soon as possible for the meeting. Again, that's going to take place March 3rd and 4th here in Washington, D.C. So while we're waiting for Alyson to join us, I'll just tell you all, give you all a little bit of information about Alyson, and then also share with you some upcoming events that we have taking place here at NACAC. So as I mentioned, Alyson is a member of our Government Relations Committee. She is the Associate Director of College Counseling School in Palo Alto. She is tuning in clear from the other side, and I think I just heard her, so thank you so much, Alyson. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. This is great. Great. Well, as I said, thank you so much, Alyson, for taking the time out of your day to join us today. So for those of you tuning in, you can leave comments on the Facebook Live with questions that you have for Alyson, and we will be sure to get to those at the end of the broadcast. But for now, we have some questions of our own, so we are just going to dive right in. So Alyson, if you can just kind of start by telling us how you a little bit about yourself, how you got into the world of admissions, and sort of how you got engaged or interested in the advocacy component of our profession.
Sure. Well, currently I'm an Associate Director of College Counseling at Castanea School. This is my 5th year here. Prior to working at Castanea, I was at Episcopal High School in Houston for a few years, and I got my start in admissions working at Rice University, also in Houston, as an assistant director, then senior assistant director. And honestly, I got into admissions by accident. I applied for the job at Rice on a whim. I put in my application on a Friday morning. I got a call Friday afternoon for an interview. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I guess it was just meant to be. My first taste of advocacy, though, was not with education advocacy. It was in health advocacy. I actually developed a lot of serious health problems when I was in my 20s, and I got involved in health advocacy as a patient advocate. And I participated in annual lobby days in Washington, D.C., where I met with my representatives and talked to them about the importance of health research, medical research, and funding for that research. And I even ended up testifying at the CDC in Atlanta and the NIH in Maryland. And so it was, that's really how I started getting involved in advocacy and meeting with representatives. I learned through that just sharing my story could make an impact. It could make a difference. And that has stayed with me. Fortunately, my health is much better these days. I was eventually diagnosed with autoimmune disease and put on the right medication. So yay for that. Yes. But I started getting involved in education advocacy really as I began to work more directly with students after I switched to the high school side, after I went from college admissions to the college counseling in a high school, because I was working more directly with marginalized students and students that had more complex backgrounds who maybe needed a little more support. And I started my advocacy really just advocating for individual students And then I started realizing, well, maybe I need to share what I've learned with colleagues. So that's how I started presenting, or that's why I started presenting at conferences. And the first college admissions conference I presented at was in 2012 at the TACAT conference. And I presented on undocumented students with some colleagues. It was from there where I started just presenting at even more conferences. So at this point, I've probably given around 20 conference presentations since then. And just, that was my form of advocacy for a number of years. And then given my past experience as a patient advocate, it wasn't a huge leap for me to jump into government relations work at the state and national level. Although it did take me a little while to get involved on the government side of things. I didn't go to my first WACAC legislative conference until 2016. And then actually last year was my first NACAC advocacy day. So I'm newer to the NACAC and WACAC legislative conferences.
Right. Great. Well, thank you so much. And I like that point that you made about how sort of what we think of as traditional professional development, attending and presenting at conferences can really complement sort of advocacy work and how those things tie really well together. So you mentioned that you just attended the WACAC, the California State Advocacy Day for the first time in 2016. And as I understand it, California actually had their Advocacy Day over the past 2 days. So it took place on Monday and Tuesday of this week.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just tell us a little bit about what was going on up in Sacramento and how the event went?
Yeah, it was great. We, oh, you know what? I meant to ask for those numbers and I haven't looked at them yet, but there were probably 30 to 40 of us that participated.
That's amazing.
And from all over WACAC. We met in Sacramento, and we had over, I think we had over 40 to 50 meetings with different legislators, and it was fantastic. This day was a great way for us to let our representatives know that what WACAC is and that we can help them if they're thinking about any kind of education, legislation. We're here to help them with any college-going culture that they want to start in their districts or encourage in their districts. And really, we let them know that we're a resource. We're also, WACAC is following a number of bills that are going on or being put forth in Sacramento as it relates to college and access and higher education. And, we're following those, and we'll certainly reach out to legislators if we feel strongly one way or the other as far as those bills go. But it's a really fun event that we do every year. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm so glad to hear that this year was another successful advocacy day for you all. And like you said, I mean, I think that so much of advocacy work in general is really just sort of sharing our stories. And as college counselors and college admission professionals, like, we and you all really are the experts on your experience. So thank you for continuing to share those experiences with the folks who are making policy. Just as a reminder for those of you tuning in, make sure to leave any questions that you have for Alyson in the comments, and also let us know where you're tuning in from. We love seeing the various places where folks are tuning in from. So thanks again for joining us. All right, so Alyson, you mentioned that just last year was your first time attending NACAC's Advocacy Day. So if you can sort of take yourself back in time and think about what that experience, how you felt sort of going into that experience. Just tell us a little bit about, how you were feeling, what you were expecting, and then maybe any advice that you have for folks who are attending for the first time this year.
Yeah, I mean, my first NACAC advocacy meeting was just last year, so it's not very hard to remember. It was,
right.
I was very excited to be there. It was so much fun to be around other people who were interested in education policy, who were excited to talk to our representatives or their legislative assistants. And it was just great to be around so many colleagues who were passionate about advocacy. In terms of expectations, I assumed it would be similar to some of the health advocacy lobby days that I'd attended before, where we'd hear from experts, we'd learn a lot, then they would let us loose to talk to legislators and their assistants about issues that were important to us. We shared our stories. We talked about what NACAC is, and so it was pretty much what I expected. Although I could certainly understand if someone has never done anything like this before, that it could be intimidating or a little scary to talk to these people who you've seen on TV and read about in the news. And so my advice would be for new people is just remember that you are the expert in the field. You know more about your job than anybody else. Even if they think they know what your job is, you know your job.
Right.
And so, that's the key point to remember. And the other part is, don't worry. You honestly don't need to know anything about what you're going to be doing, because you'll get the information you need once you arrive in DC. You'll get training. There'll be lots of us who have done things like this before who can talk to you. So it's just, I encourage anyone who's never done it and been thinking about it to come.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are tuning in who will be attending NACAC Hill Day for the first time this year, we will host a session that is specifically for first-time attendees. In past years, that event has happened, or that session has happened at the end of the first day. However, this year we'll be hosting it first thing in the morning on Sunday over breakfast. I will be leading that conversation and there to just answer any questions and maybe sort of dispel any of those nerves that folks may be feeling. I was a first-time attendee of NACAC Hill Day just in 2017, and now I'm on the other side of helping to make the event happen. So we'll be there to help get rid of maybe any of those nerves and answer any questions that you all have going into the day. So Alyson, for, I guess, sort of on the other side of that coin, for the more seasoned advocates, for folks who have been at the advocacy meeting for years in a row, what advice do you have for those folks and how they can continue to really make the most out of their experience at Advocacy Meeting?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mentoring. I really believe in the importance of sharing your knowledge with others who are less experienced in whatever it is. These, the first timers may not be new to our profession, but they're certainly new to this experience. And so I would encourage the return attendees, the ones who are now the experienced experts, to really make the new people feel welcome, be excited that they're there. The more people that we have, the better, the bigger impact we have. Help the new people feel comfortable and teach them the ropes, and then sit back and let them take the lead and just help share your best practices, help give them confidence, and pass it on.
Absolutely. And part of the really unique thing about advocacy work is that, while NACAC's policy priorities remain the same, the ways in which we're approaching those or sort of the specifics of those can be really nuanced from year to year. So we will look forward to sharing in the morning sessions, talking about sort of what we're advocating for at the moment and how the next Congress, what we can expect from the next Congress. We'll be sharing lots of information and sharing with you all how to have those conversations in a nuanced way. So for both the first time attendees and the experts in the room, we intend absolutely for those sessions to be really meaningful for everyone.
Great.
So Alyson, one of NACAC's core values is fairness and equity, and that is as part of our what was previously the SPGP and is now the CEPP, which is our guiding principles for the profession. So how do you think that NACAC's policy priorities and advocacy work help to or contribute to the realization of that value of fairness and equity?
Well, first and foremost, NACAC's values and policy priorities help us to educate our own membership and on issues of equity and access to college. We're the ones working directly with students, and it's important that we know potential roadblocks that may affect our students. It helps us to be better counselors, to be aware of these issues. Beyond our membership, it is critical to get the word out to our legislators about our values and priorities, because they're the ones that affect state and national policy. And meeting with legislators who are already on board and working towards our policy priorities lets those legislators know that they have support from their constituents and that there are people on the ground willing to fight for these values. And then meeting with legislators who do not currently support our policy priorities allows us to educate those legislators who may not be aware of issues of inequity and the challenges of the transition to college. And so ideally they'll join our mission. And so what we do is important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more. And just a reminder for those folks tuning in that you can leave your questions in the comments. We have just a couple more questions from our end for Alyson, and then we'll get to questions from those of you who are tuning in. So thanks for being here with us. So Alyson, you know, the advocacy meeting is a 2-day event. It takes place on Sunday and Monday. However, the importance of these advocacy efforts really continue throughout the year. How can members sort of continue the momentum that we build here in DC during Advocacy Day or Advocacy Meeting, and take those things back home to their institutions or to their states and really continue those efforts that we begin to build here?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely get involved in your regional ACAC Government Relations Committee. That's step one. You can also meet with your representatives locally. So even if you can't attend this day or this meeting in Washington, D.C., you can meet with your local Congress members who have home offices near you to talk about NACAC's legislative priorities. You can get involved at the state level, if your state has an advocacy day. And then on a smaller level, do what I did when I first started in advocacy, and that is present, share what you know with colleagues about issues that are important to you, share your best practices and speak up. Even if you're not presenting, if you see something happening that you know you can make a difference in, maybe even in your school by saying something, do that. So you don't have to be starting at the national level and making change at the national level. You can start small, start in your own school, start in your own community, but do something.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to remember, right? Is that there are policies that are impacting our students that are not only at the federal level, but at the state level, at the institutional level, at the local level. So those are important things to remember and have your voice heard sort of across the board on some of those issues that maybe are contributing to some of those inequities or barriers that our students are facing in pursuing their post-secondary education plans. So I think that's a really important point. I would also add, just from our side of things, that our government relations team here at NACAC, which consists of me and Michael Rose, we also make available for our members to fill out action alerts. And so those action alerts are often in response to maybe bills that have been introduced or current events, things that are really happening here in the federal policy landscape, if you will. And that's an opportunity for our members to have their voices heard. By filling out that action alert, it sends a message to their senators and representatives that share sort of their standpoint as an educator on some of these issues that we're working on advocating for. So if you're interested in getting more involved or understand, or being kept in the loop about what's going on from NACAC's Government Relations team, you can follow us on Twitter. You can be part of our mailing list. And if you have questions about how to do that, we can leave that information in the comments for you. So we do have a couple questions here from folks that are tuning in, Alyson. So we are going to go ahead and get to those. So Kathleen asked, at what level are the issues that you are advocating for? Are they national, state, international, regional? Sort of at what levels do we see our advocacy efforts play out?
You as in me personally or NACAC?
However you think is whatever your interpretation of that question is. And maybe I can fill in from the NACAC standpoint if that would be helpful.
I mean, personally, some of the issues that I'm advocating for, definitely undocumented students, transgender and gender nonconforming students. These are groups of students that I've presented on at conferences. I'm, advocating for underrepresented students of color. I've also presented on topics related to these as well. And then, fortunately, my interests align well with WACAC's and NACAC's priorities and policy goals. And so when I meet with legislators or legislative assistants, I'm often able to share stories of my work with these students, and it helps to make what I'm asking the policymakers more real, because I can tell them about actual students that I've worked with. I'm at the, well, do you want to jump in on the national level? I mean, on NACAC's work?
Sure, I can, if that would be helpful. Yeah, so, I guess we've been talking about NACAC's policy priorities in sort of this obscure way throughout the broadcast today. So let me take a moment to just sort of break down what NACAC's policy priorities are. And I think that will maybe help sort of folks who are tuning in who may be less familiar with these priorities understand what we are advocating for. So when we talk about our policy priorities, that includes advocating for students to have access to quality school counseling, which under that is where we sort of advocate for ratios, for the student to counselor ratios across the country to be brought to our recommended level of 250 to 1. There are only 3 states that meet that recommended level, and the national average is almost twice that at 470 students to 1. And so we are actively advocating for access to quality school counseling, as well as access to professional development for counselors that will help enable them to be able to provide that quality school counseling. The benefits of access to quality counseling are tremendous, as I'm sure most of us tuning in know. We know that students who meet with a college counselor are 7 times more likely to fill out the FAFSA, are more likely to apply to college, more likely to attend a 4-year degree program. So that quality school counseling is really, really important and is one of NACAC's utmost policy priorities. We also advocate for increased funding for need-based financial aid. So aid that will assist students who are most vulnerable and most in need of that financial assistance. And that's both at the federal and state level that we advocate for increased funding to those need-based financial aid pots of money, if you will. We also advocate for students to have equitable access to rigorous coursework in high school. So that includes AP courses, IB courses, other college and high school opportunities, including dual enrollment. And again, equitable access is really the key component there. We know that students who attend schools who have a high concentration of low-income students and students who attend high schools that are in rural areas are less likely to have access to that rigorous coursework. So we're advocating for students to have equitable access to those courses throughout the country. We advocate for student protections, meaning sort of protecting students against some of the predatory practices that unscrupulous colleges sort of play out in recruiting students, and we often see those practices being done by for-profit institutions. So NACAC advocates for accountability measures that will help curtail some of those predatory practices. We also advocate for undocumented students, for DACA eligible, DACA recipients, and dreamers to have access to federal financial aid and to be able to be protected by things like DACA and the DREAM Act that would help provide protection from deportation to those students. We advocate for international students, so that sort of ties into this question about sort of where we're advocating. Not only are we advocating for students at the state and federal level, but also at the international level. Our international ACAC is very involved in those efforts, and we really seek to ensure that students have mobility across borders to pursue their post-secondary education, be that students here in the United States that are interested in studying in a foreign country, or students, international students who are interested in coming to the United States to study. We have a lot going on, so I'm sorry to get kind of long-winded, but just want to make sure that we are covering these all. So our last two policy priorities are our anti-discrimination statement, which really just states that students should not be discriminated against in schools. And that is really in particular focusing on transgender students and gender nonconforming students, ensuring that those students are being treated equitably in their schools, and also advocating for schools to be safe, for school safety. NACAC is unequivocally opposed to arming educators, and we think that that original priority of access to quality school counseling ties in really closely with safe and healthy schools. So those are sort of the policy priorities that NACAC is advocating for, that we will advocate for during the advocacy meeting, and that often that our states are advocating for during their state days.
Great.
So again, sorry to get long-winded, but you can see we just have a lot going on. So anything to add to that, Alyson, or should I jump to our next question?
I thought that was great. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So what policy outcomes, this may be, I'm going to reword this question a bit for you. What policy outcomes have you been able to accomplish through your advocacy efforts? And this is a question from Tyler. Maybe you can share some of sort of your advocacy wins, quote unquote, that you have seen. Okay.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know that I've directly changed a law or anything like that, but one win that I sort of carry with me is, so we're a school that uses Naviance, and there, for those of you not familiar, it's a software that helps us manage our students and sending documents to colleges. And at the time I was working with a transgender student and two non-binary students, or they identified as non-binary, and Naviance only had the binary male and female fields, and they were required fields, so I couldn't uncheck a field, or I couldn't uncheck either of the male or female. One of them had to be checked. And so I reached out to Naviance and asked them if they could just make, they call it gender, an optional field. And I didn't really get anywhere with that. And so it actually took 3 years of harassing them. I'm not trying to make them look bad, but I kept bothering them. And I got, actually some of you who are tuning in may have helped with this effort, asked people through NACAC and through other organizations to reach out to Naviance and say, hey, we want this field to be optional for the sake of transgender and gender nonconforming students. And after 3 years, they finally listened. It took so long. We're gonna do it now. So to me, that was a big win for my students, because it seems like just a little thing making a field optional, but it can affect the mental health of students who are seeing something that is very upsetting to them. And so that was sort of a smaller scale policy win that I would say was a good thing. So I learned that one person can make a difference, and if you lead the charge and don't give up, sometimes you can make things happen. I try to take that passion and interest in what's best for my students, or what they tell me is best for them, into the advocacy I do every day, whether it's presenting or meeting with legislators. But yeah, that's the one thing that comes to mind right now.
That's excellent. That is an excellent example. And I think, as you said, it took a while, and there is really a certain level of persistence that is required for successful advocacy work. And I think that sort of feeds back into that important reminder about, ensuring that not only are we involved, that we and members are getting engaged, not only during advocacy meeting, but really year round, because these issues don't stop, and the answer to them isn't going to be found in just one weekend event. So it's important to stay persistent, to call on your colleagues to get involved in this fight. And so thank you, Alyson, for your persistence and your continued dedication to that cause. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Let me just check. I think we're getting maybe 1 or 2 more questions from folks in the comments. So let's see. Great question. So I can help answer this one, Alyson.
Okay.
You may need some help on this. So Tim, who will be in attendance at the advocacy meeting, is curious if NACAC or if the advocacy meeting will be affected by the potential government shutdown in any way. Do you want to take a stab at that, or?
Well, I would say that in terms of a lot of the training that we get, I would assume that would not be affected by any potential shutdown, because the speakers that come in to educate us about the issues, I'm assuming will still come in to educate us about the issues. We'll still talk about NACAC's legislative priorities and how to approach these types of meetings with legislators and their assistants. So I would think that at least that part of the conference would not be affected. In terms of being able to meet with representatives or their assistants, well, that could be affected by the shutdown, but I'll let you answer the rest of that question.
Sure. So really, advocacy meeting will not be affected by the government shutdown, or if there is another shutdown. Legislators have until this Friday to sign a bill sign the bills that would fund the rest of the government. However, the government is funded by a total of 12 different appropriations bills. 7 of those have already been signed. They were signed and implemented back in September of 2018. So it's just the agencies that are funded by those 5 remaining bills that are being held up sort of in this partial government shutdown, the one that we saw last month, and then that if those bills do not get signed, may shut down again. However, the bill that funds the Department of Education was one of the ones that was passed back in September, as was the bill that funds the legislative branch. So really nothing about advocacy meeting will be affected by the government shutdown if there is indeed another shutdown after the end of this week. It is important to understand or realize that in some ways, sort of the conversations that are really holding the agreements over these 5 bills may affect some of our students, and that includes DACA eligible and DACA recipients, undocumented students, and international students. So in some ways, there could be an impact for students that may be affected by the shutdown. However, advocacy meeting and really sort of the general day-to-day operations of our government relations team here at NACAC have not been affected.
Great.
So do we have any more questions? All right, so we got to all of the questions from those of you tuning in. Thank you so much for those questions. And if you have another question that comes up or that you didn't get the chance to ask today, you can always reach out to us and we'll be sure to make sure that those questions are answered. Ashley can leave our email address in the comments there that you can reach out to our government relations team here. So before we tune off or before we sign off, Alyson, any last words of wisdom or anything else you'd like to add?
If you're not sure where to start when it comes to advocacy, just start with what matters to you. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed because there are so many things that need our voice and that need our support, but we can't do everything. Start advocating for just maybe a single issue, or if that feels like too much, start advocating for one student and go from there.
That is excellent advice. Thank you so much, Alyson. Thanks to everyone who was able to tune in. We look forward to seeing most of you at the advocacy meeting in March. Thanks so much.